They say it once stood in a place no map could trace, a vast, forgotten library filled with books that disappeared the moment you read them. Scholars searched for it. Entire towns claimed to have seen it. And then, just like the stories inside, it vanished. Tonight, we tell the tale of the library that erased itself from history. If you find comfort in quiet tales and mysterious places, you're in the right corner of the universe. This is the Sleepy Planet, where we tell long, low-light stories to help you drift off naturally. If this kind of journey helps ease your mind, consider subscribing for more like it. We'd love to know where in the world you're listening from and what time you're tuning in. Drop it in the comments. And as always, now's the perfect time to dim the lights, settle in, and let your thoughts slow down. Your next story begins now. They say the library once appeared at the edge of a desert where no path led. Not a soul knew who built it. Not a soul knew when. And yet, stories about it appeared in village songs, whispered legends, and fragments of letters written by hands that have long turned to dust. The library that erased itself from history. It was not simply forgotten. It did the forgetting. It swallowed its own trail like the last page of a book that folds in on itself, leaving only the crease. Tonight, let your eyes rest and your thoughts drift. We'll trace the echoes of this place, quietly, softly, before the last memory turns to ash. The earliest mention of the library was not in a book, but on the inside of a clay pot. Archaeologists were dusting off fragments near the banks of a dried-up river in what used to be a lively crossroads of trade. Among the broken handles and weathered lids, one piece had faint inscriptions, almost invisible unless held at a particular angle under moonlight. 3 symbols, repeating, translated loosely. Remember the unread. At first, the team dismissed it. Just a pottery stamp? Perhaps the name of a forgotten merchant, but the lead researcher, Dr. Leora Sivan, noticed something. The clay wasn't local, not from this region or era. It had traces of volcanic ash found only thousands of miles away, and older than the surrounding ruins by several centuries. It didn't fit, like a bookmark from a different book left in the wrong chapter. A year later, in a different corner of the world, a wandering monk arrived at an isolated temple in the Himalayan foothills. He claimed to have seen a building that shimmered in the heat like a mirage, but remained solid underfoot. Stone arches, towering shelves, and books, rows and rows of them. But as he turned each page, he noticed the words were fading. Not like ink aging over time, like ink pulling itself backwards, vanishing into the fibers of the paper, as if trying to forget it had ever been written. The monks, skeptical at first, began to ask questions, but the man grew quiet. He no longer remembered how he got there, or how long he had stayed. All he had was a hand-drawn sketch of a door, no door frame, no building, just the door. And above it, in strange script, a library that does not wish to be known. The tale might have ended there, another oddity in the archives of folklore. But that drawing, it found its way to a woman named Eileen Mara, a historian who specialized in lost knowledge. She had a reputation for finding things people didn't want found, and when she saw the monk's sketch, her hands trembled. She had seen that door before, in a dream, years ago, when she was still a child. A door made of stone and something darker, deeper, like obsidian dust and quiet thunder. A door that made no sound when it opened, only the feeling of something waking up, Eileen spent years assembling what she called the timeline of almosts. Clues too scattered to be real. Witnesses too unreliable to trust. Objects too strange to be coincidence. A single leaf from a book found inside the wall of a 17th century clock tower. It contained no text, only the outline of text. Blank words pressed into the paper like the ghost of a story. A sailor's log from 1812, describing a building on a small island that was larger inside than outside and watched you as you read. He later claimed the island sank, but no record of it was ever found on any map. A photograph, undeveloped until decades after it was taken, that showed a silhouette of a structure no one remembered building, surrounded by what looked like thousands of moths, mid-flight. All these things had one strange detail in common. No matter how they were documented, they would begin to degrade. Not physically, historically. Records deleted, notes missing. Scholars forgetting they had even worked on them. It was as if the library was censoring its own existence. Eileen wrote nothing on paper. She memorized. She recited names and coordinates as songs in her head. She refused to speak of it openly, fearing even whispers might invite erasure. Then one evening, while walking in the woods near her childhood home, she heard it. The sound of turning pages, carried by the wind. But the trees were still. No books in sight. She followed it, step by step, until she reached a clearing she didn't know existed. And there, a door. The door. Just like the sketch. Just like her dream. She didn't go through it. Not that night. Instead, she knelt, pressed her ear to the ground, and whispered, "I remember you." The pages stopped turning, and the door was gone. But she wasn't empty-handed. In her pocket, somehow, a piece of old parchment. It read, "Knowledge cannot be kept, only remembered." No ink, just etched into the fibers. She had proof. But the next day, the parchment was blank. The next week, she forgot where she had put it. The next month, she forgot why she had ever gone to the woods. And yet, somewhere, deep in her bones, she remembered the feeling, the presence, the weight of a place that did not wish to be known, but did not wish to be forgotten. And this is where our slow story truly begins, because now we must ask, what kind of library wants to be forgotten, and why? Who built it if it wasn't meant to be found? And what happens when a place filled with stories starts writing its own? Tonight, let us wander those silent aisles, turn pages that might disappear before your eyes, and listen for the sound of memory breathing in the dark. You don't need to stay awake. The story will be here, just under the surface, softly echoing. Even as you drift, even as the ink retreats once more into silence. The morning after Eileen's forgotten memory, something strange began to happen to those around her. Her journals, once full of meticulous notes and marginalia, now contained only blank pages. Her voice recordings? Static. Emails she had sent to fellow researchers about the erasing library came back as undeliverable, yet the addresses were correct. One by one, the pieces she had gathered, proofs, testimonies, artifacts, slipped from the world. Some she lost by accident. Others, she was certain, were taken. Still, she persisted. She began writing in code. She used dreams as filing cabinets. She hid fragments of memories in lullabies and rhythms. ways she could recall while asleep, but not while fully awake. Because something had changed. Now the library wasn't just avoiding attention. It was aware of her, and she could feel its presence, even when she didn't speak of it. Especially when she didn't. She described it once, in the few words she dared share. It feels like being watched by a shadow that remembers being light. Far across the sea, in a village so small it appeared on no digital map, a boy named Lone claimed to have found a staircase in the middle of a wheat field. No walls, just stairs, spiraling down into the earth. No one believed him, until he brought back a page. It was brittle, translucent, smelled of salt and lightning. No words, just a faint warmth, like the residue of something once burning. When held against the moonlight, the page revealed invisible ink that shimmered briefly, then vanished. The boy stopped speaking after that, not out of fear, but as if speaking itself would betray the memory. Years later, Aline found the story in a local newsletter. The page was never recovered, but in her gut, she knew. The library was reaching again, or perhaps leaking. There were others, too. A cartographer in Lisbon who kept drawing the same non-existent city over and over in different maps, each version more detailed than the last, each centered around a structure he called La Casa Sin Tiempo, the house without time. A linguist in Mongolia who began dreaming in a language no one had ever recorded. When translated phonetically, her dreams formed sentences like, "Silence keeps the shelves from falling. Only unread books scream." And a janitor in an abandoned church in Quebec who discovered an elevator behind a collapsed altar. It had no buttons, only a dial. When he turned it counterclockwise, he claimed to descend not floors, but centuries. At the bottom, he found a room filled with books suspended mid-air, unmoving, as if caught mid-fall. He tried to touch one. The next thing he remembered, he was waking up in his own bed. The church was gone. In its place, a crater filled with black sand. Eileen started receiving packages with no return address. Inside, paper clippings that were warm to the touch, drawings of symbols that made her nauseous to look at. Once, a stone fragment with carvings that changed depending on the angle. She kept them hidden. Some she burned. Others she buried. But she could not forget. It was around this time she stopped using her real name. She took to the roads, never staying in one place, rarely sleeping in the same bed twice. She would listen and follow, because the library was calling. Not loudly, but like a hum behind the stars. One winter, in a small seaside town where the waves sounded like breathing, Eileen met a woman who called herself the archivist. She lived in an old lighthouse turned upside down, its lantern room now underground, its staircase winding like a snail shell. The archivist had no eyes, only sockets where light pulsed gently, like the glow of bioluminescent creatures from the depths. She said she remembered everything, except how she had come to remember it all. She told Eileen the library had once let her in, but only because she promised to leave empty-handed. Eileen asked, "Did you?" The archivist smiled with a mouth too wide. Empty hands can still carry echoes. That night, Eileen dreamt of walking backward through a storm. Each raindrop whispered a different word. Each step erased a footprint. She woke up holding a bookmark she didn't own. It had a single word etched on it. Shh. From there, The signs grew stronger. She began seeing figures in the corner of her eye, cloaked in pages, stitched with silence. Street signs began to flicker with unfamiliar titles, shadows of buildings where none had been the day before, libraries with locked doors and no staff. That felt like they were breathing, and always the whisper of pages turning, even in rooms with no books. She was close, but the closer she came, the more reality began to fray. One morning, she looked in a mirror and didn't recognize the reflection. Her eyes were the same, but her face, a little older, like someone who had lived another life while dreaming. The final clue came not in a package or a vision, but in a moment of stillness. She was sitting under a tree, old oak, watching the wind tug at its branches, and suddenly, everything paused. No wind, no bird song, no heartbeat, just silence. And then a voice, not spoken, but understood. If you enter, you will forget why you came. If you leave, you will never find it again. If you stay, you become a story. She stood, and in the bark of the tree, a door had appeared. The same door. Waiting, she reached for the handle and paused, not out of fear, out of respect, because some stories are not meant to be told, only remembered, quietly. As you fall asleep, Eileen took a slow breath. The door in the tree pulsed faintly, as if it were alive, or remembering being alive. She placed her hand on the bark, not the handle, just the surface. It was warm, like skin. Beneath her palm, she felt a rhythm, not a heartbeat, more like a page being turned over and over, endlessly. She whispered, not to the tree, but to herself, I'm ready to remember what was never mine. And the door opened. No sound, no blinding light, just darkness, so deep and vast it felt like falling into ink. She stepped through. At first, there was nothing, not emptiness, but absence. The difference is subtle. Emptiness waits to be filled. Absence remembers what once was. As she walked forward, the air shifted. She began to hear faint echoes, words spoken long ago in languages she didn't understand, but felt familiar. Every step she took seemed to write itself into the floor beneath her. The hallway she entered had no clear end. The walls were stacked with books, but none had titles. Some were wrapped in cloth, others sealed in wax, and a few floated gently off the shelves, as if they weighed nothing. It was not a place built by architects, but by memory itself. A cathedral made of forgotten thoughts. A voice greeted her, not from ahead or behind, but within. You seek stories. You have brought silence. This is the currency here. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. Not fear, just reverence. As she moved deeper, she noticed the books reacting to her presence. Some glowed softly, others pulsed. A few cracked open, revealing blank pages that slowly began to fill with ink as she stood nearby. It was then she understood. She wasn't there to read the library. She was there to write it. Every memory, every fragment she'd chased down, every whisper and journal entry. They had been preparing her not as a visitor, but as a contributor. She passed rooms filled with floating quills, scratching away at parchment that disappeared when looked at directly. A spiral staircase made of bone, leading both up and down infinitely. A gallery of mirrors, each showing not her reflection, but the person she would have been had she forgotten different things. And then she came upon the reading room. A vast circular chamber, lined with seating carved from the trunks of ancient trees. In the center, a single pedestal. Upon it, a book, closed, untitled, waiting. She approached slowly, her heartbeat steady. She reached out and opened it to the first page. Nothing. Then, words began to bloom like frost patterns. To the one who remembers what the world forgot. And suddenly, she did remember. A life before this one. Another name, another path, and a promise she made long ago. When the last story is nearly forgotten, I will return it. The library accepted her, not with ceremony, but with stillness. She could now hear the deeper hum of the place, like the breath of an ancient creature. And she realized something profound. The library wasn't hidden. It was simply unwanted. People didn't forget it because it was far away or magical. They forgot it because forgetting was easier. To remember meant accepting the weight of what had been lost, and most people weren't ready. Eileen was. Time passed differently there. She couldn't tell if it had been hours or lifetimes, but eventually, she found the exit, not marked by a door, but by a whisper. Thank you. When she stepped back into the world, the tree was gone. So was the field. She stood now in an alleyway she didn't recognize. The air smelled of rain. In her hand was a single slip of paper. It read, "You are now a librarian, not by title, but by memory. Keep the stories alive." She folded it and placed it in her coat, and walked on. From that day forward, Eileen didn't chase the stories. They found her, sometimes in dreams, sometimes in passing conversations, a stranger's glance, a newspaper headline that felt wrong. She knew what to look for now. Not facts, but fractures. Places where reality flickered, where stories once told were trying to be remembered again. And each time she uncovered one, she whispered it aloud, softly, before sleeping. This too belongs in the library. The world remained the same for the most part. People lived and laughed and forgot things. But here and there, a subtle change took root. A child dreaming of a staircase in a field. An old woman humming a tune no one taught her. A bookstore owner finding a book with no title, resting quietly on the shelf. The stories were seeping back in. Slowly, gently, not to be shouted, but told in quiet voices, just before sleep. Like this one. So as you rest now, remember, there are stories hiding in silence, in shadows, in dreams. And if you listen closely, the library might just whisper one to you. It wound and curved like a living thing, each turn revealing more of itself, as though unveiling secrets only to those patient enough to wander without question. The library did not end. By now, the world outside had all but disappeared from your thoughts. The memory of what lay beyond the library's ancient stone walls was little more than mist, soft, vague, irrelevant. You moved through a corridor where the air grew colder. Dust hung in golden streaks of moonlight that filtered through a high stained glass window, casting hues of blue, violet, and green across the wooden floor. And then, a hush. A deeper hush than before. It felt not like silence from the absence of sound, but a quiet made heavy by something present, as if the walls themselves were listening, as if the shelves were watching, as if the books knew you were here. You paused. Before you stood a hallway of black shelves taller than any you had seen, bound in deep blue leather and silver clasps. Each book glowed faintly at the edges. A sign above the archway read, "The books that were never written." What could that mean? You took a step forward, hesitant but entranced. These tomes were not records of the past, but futures imagined and never realized. Each one held stories that might have been, paths not taken, lives not lived, inventions never built, and ideas that were silenced before they could breathe. You opened one. No title, no author, just a single phrase on the first page. Had the stars been closer, this would have happened instead. You turned the page, and suddenly the story unfolded. It was the history of a world much like ours, but where starlight touched the oceans and people built cities made of mirrors that reflected the night sky. A place where sleep was sacred, and every dream was recorded like scripture. You closed it softly. You weren't ready. Another book. This one smaller, silver trim, thin paper. Its first line read, "If he had turned left instead of right, the war would never have started." A simple choice, a different life, a history that could have been gentler, softer, quieter. You placed it back and breathed out slowly. The idea that entire worlds, entire timelines could be dreamed and forgotten was both beautiful and terribly sad. They had never been real, yet somehow they were more alive in this place than many things outside it. You moved on. At the end of the corridor, a spiral staircase descended downward, lit only by floating lanterns with flames that danced like they had personalities of their own. Each step was a whisper, each turn a breath, and down below, you saw something flicker. The space you entered next was unlike the other parts of the library. Here the walls were made of obsidian stone. There were no shelves, only chairs, rows and rows of empty velvet chairs. A theater. But instead of a stage, there was a pool. A shallow pool, no more than a few inches deep, reflecting the entire ceiling which shimmered like stars in motion. You sat. The chair welcomed you, soft, warm, like it remembered you. And then, from the water, rose an image. A woman, writing at a desk by candlelight. Her hand trembled as she wrote, as though she knew this was the last time she would ever hold a pen. You could not read the words, but somehow you understood the feeling. It was grief. It was memory. It was an ending. Then the image faded. A man appeared next. He was standing on a hill, staring at a sky filled with 3 moons. He whispered something. You couldn't hear him, but you didn't need to. His loneliness filled the room like scent. Again, the water rippled and calmed. This was a memory theater, a place where echoes of lost lives played endlessly. Never for an audience, only for themselves. Perhaps they had been real. Perhaps not. Perhaps. This was where forgotten emotions came to rest. You stood quietly, letting your breath slow, the quiet of the chamber drawing your body further into stillness. It was time to go deeper. There was a door behind the last row of seats, barely noticeable in the dark. It opened without sound. You entered a hallway narrower than the rest, lit by a slow-burning line of candlelight embedded into the floor. No shelves, no books. Instead, the walls here were engraved with names. Thousands of them. Millions, perhaps. Every inch of stone bore letters carved by hand, different languages, different scripts, names long gone from memory, no longer spoken. A plaque read, "The Hall of Remembered Silence," a space for those who had no story written about them, but whose lives mattered, still and always. You touched one of the names. It felt warm, and in that moment, you saw a boy, running barefoot across a field of wildflowers, laughing as the sun poured over the hills behind him. No one had written his name in history books. No monument had ever stood in his honor. But he had lived. He had laughed. And that was enough. You pressed forward. The hallway opened into a garden, an impossible garden, indoors and yet filled with the scent of night-blooming jasmine. The ceiling was open to a false sky, painted with constellations that slowly rotated. You took a seat beneath a crooked willow tree. Its bark shimmered with dew that smelled faintly of lavender. All around you, flowers glowed gently in blues and purples. Some pulsed with light like breathing. Others sang the softest melodies, barely audible, like lullabies wrapped in wind. You closed your eyes, and for a moment, the library breathed with you. It had accepted your presence, welcomed your stillness, offered you its secrets not with urgency, but with timelessness. There was no rush. There never had been. You rose gently from the base of the willow tree. Though time had slipped from your awareness, you felt no pressure to move, only a soft nudge from within, a quiet curiosity urging you onward. A narrow stone path curved through the glowing garden. Each step you took released a faint shimmer beneath your feet, as though the stones remembered the pressure of every traveler before you. You walked without haste. At the end of the path stood a small arched gate formed not of iron or wood, but of woven vines and gentle moonlight. The gate opened with no effort, as if it recognized you. Beyond it, another wing of the library, this one darker, colder, yet no less inviting. It was called the Atrium of Unfinished Words. Here, the shelves were scattered, uneven, tilted like the pages had grown restless and shifted themselves. Candles floated mid-air, casting long shadows that danced lazily across the floors. And there, atop a carved marble pedestal, rested an object unlike anything you had seen. It was a quill, floating in place, ink dripping upward instead of down. Beneath it, a book without words. As you approached, the quill stirred. Then, it began to write. The letters flowed gently, like rain against a window. Line after line appeared before your eyes, not with ink, but with soft light. It was writing, your thoughts, not the loud ones, not the ones you spoke to yourself every day, but the buried ones, the thoughts you had never fully formed, the longings you had never dared to articulate, the questions you didn't know you were asking. You turned a page, more light, more truths. The book had no name, no cover, only your presence gave it meaning. You sat before it, and in the silence, your mind became still. Then the quill stopped. It hovered once more, suspended between questions and answers. You stood, heart slower than before, mind quiet. Beyond the pedestal, you noticed a series of doors, each carved from a different kind of wood: cedar, oak, mahogany, willow, each inscribed with a single word in gold leaf: whisper, echo, memory, sleep. It was the last door that opened as you stepped near. The doorway dissolved into a dark hallway lit only by floor lanterns shaped like falling leaves. Your footsteps were silent. Even your breath seemed to hesitate. Then the air changed. There was a presence here. Not threatening? No, not at all. But ancient. The hallway opened into a rotunda. The ceiling stretched so high you could not see the top, and from it, sound drifted downward like fog. A low hum, like an orchestra of forgotten lullabies, all playing at once, yet never in dissonance. In the center of the rotunda, a pool, not of water, but of shadow, gently swirling, infinite in depth. You stepped to the edge, and for the first time, you saw yourself, not in the way mirrors show us, but as if the shadow remembered your life better than you did. Moments returned. The way sunlight once warmed your skin on a childhood morning, the smell of someone you lost, the laughter of a night you had forgotten. You watched, you remembered, and still, you breathed. You let it go. Behind the rotunda, the last passage waited. It curved downward, spiral-like, carved into obsidian stone. Tiny lanterns, one by one, lit themselves as you passed. The deeper you walked, the quieter everything became. Even your thoughts slowed. Even your name felt distant. Then, the hallway opened one final time, and there it was. The chamber of the eternal page. The center of the library, a place not built, but grown. Its walls pulsed with soft light, like the inside of a shell lit by moonlight. And at its center, a book, the largest you'd seen, bound in night sky, trimmed with golden threads that moved like rivers under starlight. You stepped close. It was open. But the pages were blank. And then, a voice, not out loud, but inside your chest. What will you leave behind? You did not answer. Instead, you placed your hand on the page. And in that instant, your quietest memory returned. A morning long ago. Rain tapping on the window. A voice humming softly in the next room. The feeling of being small, safe, unseen. The book absorbed it. Not as text, but as truth. The page shimmered, then stilled. You looked up. The room now glowed brighter, not harsh, just enough to see that you were not alone. Others had been here. Other hands, other memories, other dreams offered to the endless archive of what it means to be alive. You sat. For how long, you could not say. There was no need to leave. No need to wake. Because in this place, time did not chase you. Thoughts did not demand you. Here, everything simply was. The quiet lingered, not as a void, but as a companion. It wrapped around you like an old, soft shawl, familiar and perfectly worn by time. Nothing moved, but everything breathed. Your chair, that strange, welcoming throne of calm, pulsed beneath you as if alive, not in a threatening way, in a way that made your heartbeat slow just a little, just enough to forget where tension used to live inside you. There was no clock, no ticking, no rhythm to obey. You could have sat for days or minutes. Time, like a candle in water, had gone out without ceremony. But then, a sensation, a pressureless pull, like memory remembering you. You rose. The forest remained behind, still whispering through the leafy hush, still guarding dreams in chairs made of moonlight and bark. You followed the path again. This time, it wasn't even a path, just space that felt right underfoot, an invitation more than a direction. The world shifted again, and now you stood in a vast corridor, wider than a canyon, but enclosed as if built for giants made of silence. Above you, constellations moved, not painted, not projected, real. Stars danced slow across a midnight ceiling, each one trailing tiny threads of silver ink behind it, leaving looping letters across the dark. Not letters of any language you knew, but they spoke, not to your ears, to your memory. You walked beneath them. Awe replaced breath. And then, on one side, you saw shelves, but not ordinary ones. These were made of shadow stitched with soft light. And the books, they glowed faintly, each a constellation of its own. Titles pulsed gently, as if trying not to wake anyone. You pulled one. It was heavy, but not with weight, heavy with presence. Opening it revealed no pages, only moments. You blinked and found yourself standing in one. You were on a cliff. Wind whistled past your ears. A voice called a name. Maybe yours, maybe not. Somewhere below, torches flickered like nervous fireflies. And then, just as your heartbeat began to race, snap. The moment folded back in, and you were back beneath the stars. Book in hand, library around you. You hadn't moved, but everything inside you had. You placed the book back. The corridor went on. You walked again, slowly, deliberately, letting every step be a lullaby. Then the next room opened before you. It was darker, darker than night, darker than closed eyes, but not frightening. You could still see, somehow, not with sight, with memory. Everything around you seemed made of fragments, broken mirrors, unfinished stories, unsent letters, closed doors, and yet they shimmered, not in gold, but in recognition. You stepped inside. Your footfall echoed, once, twice, then silence again. Floating in the center was a desk, old, worn, covered in scratches and ink blots. On it, a single quill hovered, waiting. You approached. As your hand neared it, the quill dipped itself gently into an invisible inkwell and moved toward a blank page, which hadn't been there a moment ago. You didn't know what you wanted to say. But the quill did. It began to write. Not fast, not slow, just write. And word after word, the page began to fill. You leaned in to read. It was your story. but not the one you tell out loud. The one you keep in the gentle drawer behind your thoughts. You read the first lines. I once forgot who I was, because the world told me too many other names. But now, in the place between breath and sleep, I am allowed to remember. The quill paused, as if letting the words soak into your chest, then continued. This library does not judge what you've written before. It only asks you to write what still needs to be felt. You looked around. Shelves lined the edges of the space. Every shelf held books without titles, not because they were blank, but because you hadn't titled them yet. This was your wing, the wing of unfinished echoes. You ran your fingers along the spines of unwritten futures. Soft hums radiated from them, each one a possibility, a path not yet walked, a thought not yet dreamed. Behind you, the quill returned to its rest. The room dimmed even more, not from darkness, but from release, as if your mind had just exhaled a weight it had carried for too long. You stepped back out into the corridor. Stars still wheeled above. They hadn't moved, but the language they wrote now glowed just a bit brighter. And then you saw a door, not like the others. It was smaller, circular, carved with waves and hourglasses and keys. It pulsed. You reached out, but before your hand touched it, a whisper, not out loud. Inside. To open this door, you must first remember the sound of your own silence. You paused. The corridor faded behind you. The door remained. You closed your eyes and listened, not for music, not for voices, but for the quiet between your thoughts, for the space that had always been there, but was often buried. And then, there it was. Silence, not the absence of sound, but the presence of peace. The door opened. The corridor awaited. No wind, no footsteps. Yet it felt as though something had shifted within the very walls themselves. The shelves breathed softly, as if the books had just finished telling stories to one another. Each spine seemed to lean forward ever so slightly, curious to see where you might wander next. Your fingers brushed the edge of a volume. Its title shimmered only for a moment, written in a script that faded the instant you blinked. You didn't need to read it. Somehow, you knew its story was already inside you, waiting, resting, dreaming. You walked again, not because you were lost, but because you were listening. A faint hum echoed from deep ahead, not mechanical, not musical, something organic, almost like breathing, but slower. You turned a gentle corner, and there it was, a doorway framed by trees. Yes, trees. They had grown through the walls, the roots tangled in the ceiling, the branches forming an arch of leaves and bark and blossom. This door had not been built. It had bloomed. You stepped through the threshold as if slipping into a memory long forgotten. And on the other side, the world had changed again. A garden of dusk. Not quite night. Not quite day. The sky above was the color of indigo ink just beginning to spill across paper. Faint stars blinked in and out like they were uncertain whether to stay. Flowers here did not bloom by sunlight. They opened only when spoken to softly. You didn't need to speak. Your presence was enough. A carpet of soft petals unfolded beneath your feet with each step, cushioning you in warmth and color. The air carried the scent of lavender, moss, and old paper, a smell that said, "You are safe here." In the center of the garden stood a table, round, carved from driftwood, and upon it, a single open book. Its pages fluttered, though there was no wind. You sat before it. The text was not printed. It was written in movement. Tiny ink creatures, moths, fish, foxes, danced across the page, forming lines and shapes and stories. Their motion was the language. And again, you understood. This book did not require you to read. It asked you only to feel. You reached forward and let your fingertips graze the paper. The sensation was warm, almost like skin. And then, without warning, the book pulsed. A low, deep tone filled the garden. Not sound, more like a vibration that tickled the soles of your feet and climbed gently up your spine. The sky above responded. The stars aligned for just a breath. And then you heard it, faint but unmistakable. Laughter, not from another person, from yourself. A memory of a time when you laughed so freely, your stomach ached and tears welled in your eyes. A moment when everything else faded and only the present existed. The book was showing you the moments that kept you human, the softest truths. You turned the page. This time, a room, filled with music boxes, each one different. You walked among them. The floor was cloud soft. You reached out and wound one. It played a lullaby you'd heard before, but couldn't place. It sounded like a rainy afternoon, like the heartbeat of someone who once held your hand. You closed your eyes, and when you opened them, the garden had changed. It was nighttime now. The stars above were clearer, sharper, like diamonds suspended in ink. The flowers had folded into sleep. But something else had emerged. Lanterns, dozens of them floating in slow circles around the table. Inside each one, a scene. Some were yours, some were not. All of them were beautiful. A woman holding her grandmother's hand. A man dancing alone under moonlight. A child feeding a stray dog. A teen writing poetry under bed sheets. An elder planting a tree in silence. Tiny slices of truth. You watched them flicker and glow, and you realized this library wasn't about the biggest stories. Not wars, not kings, not grand adventures. It was about the quiet ones, the forgotten seconds, the unspoken kindness, the small moments that shape us when no one else is looking. The lanterns drifted closer to you, then slowly rose. One by one, they vanished into the night sky, becoming stars. You stood again, this time with your heart a little heavier, but your soul lighter. You passed through the trees once more, back into the corridor, and something curious happened. The books bowed, not dramatically, but subtly, a ripple through the shelves, a tilt of the spines. They acknowledged you, not as a guest, but as a keeper. You were no longer just walking through this place. You were part of it. You walked until a spiral staircase came into view, coiling upward toward a soft glow. It wasn't urgent, but it was inviting. You climbed, and as you did, something strange began to happen. The sound of your own footsteps became musical. Each step a note, each pause a rest. You were composing a lullaby simply by moving, by existing. When you reached the top, there was no grand room waiting, only a platform, open to the stars, no walls, no ceiling, only sky. The wind here was warm. Software, it didn't push. It cradled. And in the center of the platform, a chair, woven from threads of moonlight and sleep. You sat, and as you did, the sky began to move. Not fast, not chaotic, but deliberately. A constellation formed above you. It resembled a hand reaching out. Then a door. Then a heart. Then an eye, not watching, witnessing. And slowly, they all folded into a single glowing orb, a star brighter than the others. It pulsed once, twice, then it settled, and you closed your eyes. Not from exhaustion, but from arrival. Because here above the Garden of Dusk, within the corridors of unwritten stories, beyond the memory of time, you had found something more valuable than sleep. You had found stillness. You sat quietly beneath the sky, still embraced by the cool hush of the upper platform. No more steps, no more corridors, no more questions. Just the breath of stars above, slow and steady, matching your own. The chair beneath you, woven from moonlight and memory, held your weight as if it had known you forever. Not heavy, not light, exactly as you were meant to be. You looked out across the invisible horizon. There were no mountains, no buildings, no landmarks. Just a gentle sea of starlight, rising and falling, rippling in rhythms too ancient to explain. Somewhere, far below, the corridors of the dream library continued to shift and hum. But here, above it all, time had finally stopped following you. It no longer whispered at your back, no longer measured your breath, no longer tugged you toward the next thing. Time had let go. You leaned back slightly, and for the first time, the silence spoke. Not with words, not with sound, but with feeling. It told you, you've wandered long enough. You've remembered enough. You've dreamed enough. It is okay now to rest. And so you let your eyes soften. You didn't close them. Not yet. There was one more thing. One final moment. The stars above began to drift again. But this time they weren't forming symbols or patterns. They were forming pages. Glowing sheets of light fluttered across the sky, blank at first, then slowly filled with lines, sentences, paragraphs, not in ink, but in memory. You recognized them, not exactly, but emotionally. The words were reflections of every step you had taken. The gardens, the book of ink creatures, the lanterns, the staircase of song. All of it was there, and within it, your presence. You weren't just reading the story anymore. You had become part of the story. The star pages folded gently together, like hands in prayer. They became a single glowing book. It floated downward from the sky, not falling, but arriving. It hovered just before you, waiting. You reached out. There was no fear, no uncertainty, no need to ask what it was. You knew It was yours. A record of your wandering. A lullaby written in story. You opened the cover, and instead of reading it, you simply understood it. All at once. Like waking from a dream and remembering everything clearly. And with that knowing came peace. A peace not loud, not sharp. A peace that curled gently around your heart and whispered, "You did well." You closed the book and placed it on your lap. It glowed a moment longer, then dimmed, as if settling into sleep, just as you were. The stars above dimmed with it. The air cooled slightly, not to chill, but to comfort. The rhythm of the world slowed, and finally, you let your eyes drift shut. No pressure, no force, just softness, and behind your closed eyes, the library remained. Not in vision, but in essence. You would carry it with you, a dream you could revisit whenever needed, because you now knew something you hadn't before, that sometimes the most powerful stories are not the ones that demand to be told, but the ones that simply let you rest. So you breathed in, then out, and in that final exhale, the book vanished. The chair faded. The stars tucked themselves back into the sky. And you simply slept.